Welcome back to Unveiling the Covenants, exploring the mysteries of sacred scripture, the love of our Father from the heart of the church. I'm Marcus Peter, continuing the story of Jacob. When we last left off, God was flourishing Jacob. Now remember, just a bit of a recap, we're talking about salvation history here. So God's plan of love and salvation for us worked out through the history of humanity, particularly through the life of what we will come to know as Israel through this narrative. Jacob has left his father's home. He's gone to Padan Aram. He's living with his uncle Laban. He has married his two cousins, Leah and Rachel, tricked into marrying Leah, really wanted to marry Rachel. But because of the stiff competition between the siblings, as I've mentioned in an earlier episode, Jacob winds up taking two other concubines who are the servant girls of Rachel and Leah. And so because of that, he now has 4 wives who are all competing for his attention. Now, the servant girls are really concubines. They're not real wives. He doesn't sign covenant with them. They're sort of contract wives. The daughters and sons of these women become the daughters and sons of Rachel and Leah. Now, what does all this have to do with anything? God still blesses. He still has his hand on Jacob. Jacob is now flourishing. Laban doesn't give Jacob the fairest of the trade and the fairest of remuneration for his services. Jacob is the reason Laban is becoming more and more wealthy because, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, Jacob is a man who dwelled in tents. And so the work of administration, of shepherding, the work of livestock and its care, the work of building wealth within the tent, he was a master at it. And clearly, his prudence and his mastery became a blessing to Laban, so much so that by the time Laban is getting older and Laban's sons have arisen, they start getting envious of Jacob because Jacob has made Laban so wealthy, but they want the wealth to go to them, not to Jacob. And so they start murmuring amongst themselves. And so Jacob comes up with this whole thing of a trade because Laban starts distrusting Jacob. And the trade is simply this. He tells Laban, any goat and sheep, any cattle that is clear-colored, you may have it, but the spotted, the speckled, the discolored animals, those will be mine to have. And so there's this whole thing where he has the animals mate in a particular way while viewing discolored things. Now, it's an old wives' tale to be sure, but what we do see is Jacob winds up becoming tremendously wealthy because of doing this thing. Really what's going on is God's hand is over Jacob still, and he is blessed and blessed immensely, and so he becomes tremendously wealthy. But once the murmuring starts amongst Laban's sons, Jacob realizes, I have to get out of here, lest they kill me and take my wealth, but I don't have favor here anymore. In the end, to consider this, Jacob knows this is not his home. He prayed at Bethel that he wanted to go back to the land of his father. Not just because his father and mother lived there, but because by legal claim he had a right to that land, and he was ordained into that covenant priesthood, and therefore he is the real covenant mediator, the heir of Isaac. He is also therefore the rightful administrator of the tribe there. He is also therefore the rightful owner of that land. All of this is his by legal right, legal claim. And so he has a right to go back to it. And that was always his plan to begin with. He didn't want to leave the land of his father. He understands that this is what God has in store. He is now a man who follows the Lord. And so what happens? He sneaks off, not just with his 2 brides and his concubines, their servant girls, but also his sons and his entire tribe, his servants and all of his livestock. He sneaks off in the middle of the night. Laban catches up with him. As they are fleeing, Laban catches up with them. It was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled. And so Jacob had a 3-day head start. But Laban overtook Jacob. And Jacob pitched his tent in the hill country. Laban confronted him. What have you done? You've cheated me, carried away my daughters like captives. Why did you flee secretly and cheat me and did not tell me? I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre. Now, here's the thing. If we're being very honest, by this point, Laban wanted to see Jacob go. He's just looking for a further reason to incite anger to Jacob. But he also realizes this. Jacob is tremendously wealthy and is going to be wealthier. And therefore, his influence is going to increase. Laban has a desire here. He wants Jacob's favor, or at least he wants Jacob to be indebted to him. And this is what he says. You have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. Now, this is a kind of Near Eastern tradition, so to speak. Jacob has lived in the affluence and therefore generosity of Laban all this while, and so he sort of owes him that debt of charity. Hey, I'm leaving, and I want to let you know I'm leaving, and I'm taking all that is mine I'm taking. But Laban also realizes Jacob leaving is Laban losing his most astute manager. And so he's going to take a hit. But Laban is wealthy himself, and he's got sons to run the trade. He wants Jacob's favor. He knows if Jacob becomes a superpower in his own right, his sons, Laban's sons, will be in jeopardy. And so what does he want? He ultimately wants a covenant. Laban went into Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and eventually they cut a covenant. Now there's a whole story of Rachel having stolen her family's idols. These are, well, remember in Padan Aram, not everyone obeys the covenant of the Lord. And so this language of Rachel having stolen the family's idols probably has to do with an overt attachment to the idols of the area and therefore pagan worship. What we do know, however, is this is the only time or the last time we will see any appeal to these idols, because what happens after? Rachel will enter into Bethel and eventually into Canaan and that land that is theirs. And so what happens? There's no way she can hold on to those idols. The whole family is given to the Lord of hosts. But what do we see in 31 verse 43? Laban answered and said, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, all that you see is mine, but what can I do this day to these? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I. Let it be a witness between you and me. Jacob took a stone, set it up as a pillar, and so he and Laban cut a covenant. And so now this uncle, who was once his employer, Laban is trying to make a claim here. Everything you have belongs to me. Jacob, however, has the legal right to say no. Everything I have, sure, was instrumentally contributed by you, but it was the Lord God who flourished my wealth. What Laban is doing now in cutting a covenant is he's elevating Jacob to his stature. Laban is now making a formal recognition. You, my nephew, who came to me with nothing, the Lord has blessed you so powerfully. The Lord has made you so wondrously affluent now. I recognize your stature. And so Laban cuts a covenant elevating Jacob to his stature, to his position, to his place and standing in society. Laban is effectively saying, because of this covenant, you and I are now brothers like never before. And so because of this covenant, no harm shall befall you from my side, but also no harm may befall my side because of you. Laban is securing his place in security, in protection, in friendship, with Jacob's eventual growth and flourishing. Because try as Laban might, one thing is abundantly clear. In the over decade and a half that Jacob has been with Laban, he has seen how the God of the universe has his hand on Jacob. Laban wants in on that blessing to some degree, or at least at the lowest level, he wants Jacob to not have enmity with him. So they set up a pillar, and they eat bread, they offer blood sacrifice, they eat bread, and so they cut this covenant. Early in the morning, Laban arose, kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, blessed them, and then he departed and returned home, knowing he now has the favor of Jacob. Now, this is going to be crucial, because Jacob is going to be father of a great nation, Israel. Because of this covenant, the descendants of Abraham in that regard, that side of the family, or at least the relatives of Abraham in that regard, will forever remain in covenantal favor until they themselves turn against Israel, which we'll discuss at a later episode. So Jacob went his way. The angels of God met him. Jacob saw them and said, this is God's army, and he calls the name of that place Mahanaim. Now, we don't have a lot of indicators of what's going on here, but what we do know is God is blessing Jacob's return. This vision of angels greets Jacob in his return home. If you will remember, it is akin to what we saw in Genesis 28. that when Jacob was sleeping, he saw angels ascending and descending. So now he is returning to where God wants him to be once again. He has been a foreigner in a land for a while, but he's returning to God's plan. He's returning to the home that was intended for him. And so the angels greet him. Welcome, thou who are intended for this land. Once again, yes, there is a natural legalistic claim for all the descendants of Jacob upon that land. Make no mistake about it, that land belongs to them by legal right. Covenantal right is legal right. The people of Israel, descendants of Jacob, have a claim to that land. That's not Zionism in terms of a socio-political stance. That's a biblical, historical reality. But I also want to elevate it further. Nowhere in the scriptures do we see the repudiation of the promise of that land in covenant. So as long as the promises of the Abrahamic covenant stand, that promise of that physical land continues. Sure, the church is the new Israel, but the church is not the new Israel divorced from the old Israel. She is a branch grafted upon that same olive tree. Spiritually, therefore, you and I are Shemites, belonging to this community. We are, if you will, the younger brothers and sisters adopted into this covenantal heritage in fulfillment. We have the full picture in Christ. The Jews who have yet to receive Jesus Christ have not yet come to that fulfillment. Ours is the obligation of drawing them in, but do not reject them. Do not ever turn around and say, because you rejected Jesus, you have been cut off from the covenant. Rather, as Paul himself says in Romans, the conversion of the Jews will come, and it is incumbent upon us to evangelize them in the fullness of the gospel and to support them as older brothers and sisters in the life of the covenant, because that covenantal identity precedes the Catholic Church. That's not speculation, it's covenantal realism. That's not an invention on my part, it's biblical fact. And so you and I have an obligation to honor that. Now, I want to take this a step further here. Jacob realizes now where he is. He's at Bethel, and he wants to go back to Canaan. He wants to go back to what will eventually be called the land of Israel. There's a catch. He is terrified of his brother. It's been over a decade, and he is concerned that Esau still wants to do him harm, wants to kill him. Because remember, Esau doesn't have the blessing of the covenant, mediatorship. He doesn't have the legal claim the way Jacob does. He probably still loathes his brother. And so what do we see? Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. By this point, Esau had become so affluent, he had his own country. Thus shall you say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban, stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, manservants, maidservants, and I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in your sight. And so the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau. He is coming to meet you with 400 men with him. And now Jacob's terrified. But what does he have to cling to? He has to cling to the promise of God before. He has no physical evidence that Esau won't do him harm. He's terrified. So what does he do? He divides the people that were with him, the flocks and herds and camels, into two companies, because if Esau comes to the one company and destroys it, the company which is left will escape, because he's being prudent here once again. Once again, you see the kind of practical wisdom about his ownership and stewardship of property. What does Jacob say? He turns to the Lord in prayer. God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, I will do you good. I'm not worthy of the least of all the mercy and all of the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. With only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two companies. By the way, each company is an extremely large reality. Each company represents thousands. So he then holds God to his promise. Deliver me, I beg you, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. I fear him, lest he come and slay us all, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will do you good, and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. And so he lodged there that night, and took from what he had with him a present for his brother Esau, 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, and these he delivered into the hands of his servant, every drove, and said, pass on before me, put a space between drove after drove. When my brother Esau meets you, you shall say, they belong to your servant Jacob, they're a present. And you shall say to him the same thing every time you meet him. And so he's sending wave upon wave of gift here. Look at the prudence of this man. He's trying to win his brother's favor. He doesn't know where his brother is at. He doesn't know whether Esau has forgiven him or not. But he's trying to win his favor. That night, he lodged in the camp. And that same night he arose, took his wives, and he took and his children, his 11 children. He crossed the ford, and Jacob was left alone that night. And a man wrestled with him. This is mysterious. We don't have an indicator where the man came from. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched the hollow of his thigh. So this is where we would consider the connection of the sciatic muscle. And Jacob's thigh was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Mind you, tradition holds that this was an angel, representative of God. And so the language we are seeing here is that Jacob has been wrestling with God his whole life. And even now he's wrestling with God. And by sheer resolution, he wants to do what the Lord promised him would come to be. And so that's what this wrestling represents. Then he said, the man whom he's wrestling said, let me go, for the day is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So now let this be a lesson to all of us. If you want a blessing and you don't get it, wrestle the person until they bless you. That's a good way to do it. I used to do this to my spiritual director for fun. It wasn't a real wrestle. We just fooled around with each other by means of a contest of strength. And I'd say, I won't let you go until you bless me. So that's a way to do it. Sons and daughters, if you're listening, especially sons, if you want your father to bless you, when he comes home from work today, wrestle him. And make sure, once you're holding him firm, say, I won't let you go until you bless me. That is a surefire way to get his blessing and to gain his favor. Now, going back to this, he said, Jacob said to him, what is your name? The angel said to him, what is your name? And Jacob said, Jacob. And the angel said, your name shall no more be called Jacob, but Israel. Literally, you wrestle, he who wrestles, or you who wrestle with Elohim, with the Lord. You have striven with God and with men, and you have prevailed. And Jacob said to him, tell me, I pray, your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. Now, there's a wisdom behind this reality. There's a terrible tradition that was born out of first New Age practices that eventually seeped into especially spiritualized Catholic practices, where we are told, it came from Pentecostalism really, where we are told to ask for the name of our guardian angels and it will be revealed to you. Do not do it. This is one of the many proof texts that will teach us of this. Do not do it. There are only 3 angels that we see with definitive clarity reveal their names in Scripture that the church confidently uses. Michael, Raphael, Gabriel. Mikael, who is like God. Raphael, the healing of God. Gabriel, the man of God, or the voice of God, or the one sent forth, messenger of God. Outside of this, angels don't reveal their names, and the reason why is because angels don't operate with the limitation of human persons. Their names and their language are infinitely more elevated, or at least proportionately more elevated than anything our human nature can comprehend. When we go to heaven, by means of participation in God's own divinity, we will be revealed the names of these angels. Each angel possesses a unique and unrepeatable name. No other angel possesses that name. So in the case of Michael, for example, Michael is the fullness of Michaelness. There is no other Michael angel out there. Each angel is an individuated substance. Each angel is his own species. And that's tough for us to understand. Good. If it gives you a headache, good. What this tells us is we cannot even comprehend the angels, let alone God. And if that's the case, do not go asking for an angel's name, because more often than not, the voice that you hear, you don't know if it's from God or from a source that's not God. Ultimately, either your fallen human nature or an evil spirit. Rather, just refer to your guardian angel as guardian angel. And this is one proof positive. The angel says, why is it that you ask my name? Because there's a divine elevated reality to this. Short of the angel willingly revealing his name, which typically connotes his mission, the angel doesn't have to reveal his name. You and I will find that out on the other side of the veil. So he asks this question, doesn't provide an answer, it's rhetorical, to demonstrate that as an angelic being, he is significantly higher than Jacob. So then the question becomes, how is he losing this wrestling match? Aha! That's a good question. How is an angelic being losing a wrestling match against a fallen human person, especially even after his hip socket has been put out of joint? It's the mercy of God. God is allowing this to happen. God is allowing Jacob to strive through the night, no less, to demonstrate to him in a physical manner the spiritual reality that his soul has been undergoing. God is basically letting this angel lose. Now, it's not that God is throwing the match here. This isn't a competition. God is trying to teach Jacob a lesson. For as much as you wrestle with me, it won't be well for you. And that's why his hip socket gets put out of joint. But for as much as you submit, if you yield to me, I will be the one who fights for you. Jacob will forever walk with a limp, and this physical limp will become a spiritual reminder to him to obey the commands of the Lord, to be faithful to the Lord. In fact, to this day, or at least until the destruction of the temple at the very least, whenever the Jews offered a lamb, particularly a Passover lamb for sacrifice, they never ate the sciatic muscle, out of honor for Jacob, whose sciatic muscle was withered. Now, let's go back to this. There, the angel blessed him. Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, I have seen God face to face, and yet I have been preserved. I have seen God face to face, and yet I have been preserved. And so this language here, it recalls how Jacob was surprised to see God's face, so to speak, but he's relieved that he is seeing God's face and coming forth what? Unharmed. Because Peniel is an alternative spelling of the word Penuel. It means the face of God, quite literally. So there he is. Jacob's thigh on the sinew of the hip, withered. Jacob now walks with a limp. In other words, if Jacob were to wrestle Esau right now, high likelihood he might fail. There's a further reality at play here. Jacob up to this point relied on God, but also relied on his shrewdness, his cunning, his acumen. God was telling him, from here on out, you need to remember, I blessed you, I brought you here. You need to remember, this isn't happenstance. My blessings are what's going to flourish you, nothing else. And so I will be your protector against Esau. Is Jacob still terrified? Sure. Is he learning to trust God more? Yeah, he is. So let's see what happens. Jacob lifts his eyes and look, the day has drawn. Esau was coming, 400 men with him. He divides his children, his wives, and then he goes before Esau, bows to the ground 7 times, which again is the language of covenant. He's trying to rekindle a holy covenantal bond with his brother. But Esau ran to meet him with his fists bared, and he strikes Jacob. No, none of that. Esau ran to meet him, verse 4, 33 verse 4, embraced him, fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau raised his eyes and he saw the women, and he says, who are these with you? And Esau said, well, essentially he said, this is my family. And Esau said, what do you mean by all this company that I have met? And Jacob answers this, to find favor in your sight. But Esau answers, remember, he's the Lord of a kingdom now. I have enough for myself, brother. Keep what you have. But then Jacob says, no, you don't understand. I'm so wealthy that these gifts really don't matter. But secondly, he also knows whatever he gives away, God's going to bless him even more abundantly. So he says, I beg you, if I have found favor in your sight, accept my present from my hand. For truly, remember that language, Penuel, to see the face of God? Truly to see your face is like seeing the face of God. And it comes full circle. Jacob, who veiled his face from his blind father, who ran from the face of his brother, who beheld the face of God at Bethel, who was a stranger in nowhere and who, because Leah's face was veiled from him, was conned, and he married her, now finds himself returning, and what does he see? The face of God in first angels and then wrestling with an angel. And now it comes full circle, and he beholds the face of his brother again. And he says it is like beholding the face of God. What is the lesson here for us? We can't run from the Lord. The Lord is this relentless hound of heaven, as Fulton Sheen called him, and he seeks us out unyieldingly until he has won us over. I want to speak to those things in your life that you are most terrified about, especially in your past. And I want to assure you that if you have chosen to walk with the Lord our God faithfully, you hide nothing from God and from man, then the Lord himself will be your protector. The Lord himself will preserve you, and he will bring you back to the blessings that he has always intended for you. Let Jacob's life be a lesson for all of us, that the promises of the Lord endure and come to fulfillment. May God bless your family in that way, and may all the pains and hurts of your past be turned into tenfold, hundredfold, thousandfold blessings because of the Lord's promise. Until next time, God bless you and keep you always. I'm Marcus Peter.